Hello, this is Gary Hunter, and today I want to talk to you about, in a very macro level perspective, about sales management and some of the major components of sales management. And parts of this presentation, we will give you some reflection of economics of sales and what's going on in sales in terms of the U.S., so you can get a feel for like sales jobs and some of those kind of things. But we're also going to talk about some other objectives beyond just kind of understanding sales jobs and that macro perspective on sales and sales management, because I want to talk as well about helping you to understand the organization's or management's role. What do managers do in sales organizations? And I'm going to frame that a bit around the idea of objectives, goals, strategies, and measures. Then I want to talk some about how we can use value propositions as a way to integrate sales and marketing strategy with organizational strategy. So value proposition is going to be kind of a central piece of how we think about integrating all of those things together. And then I'll end with like 4 components of what really make up a sales strategy. And those are going to be people, process, relationship, and technology. So that's kind of what I'm covering in this video. And you can see these 4 different blocks as we go along, but I'm going to start with that macro perspective on sales management. Looking at the practice of sales management, one of the places that we're going to turn to first is really going to be some of the, well, the first thing I want to say is that sales force, the word force a lot of times is used when people are talking about sales management. So I am talking about the same thing, sales management and sales force management. There's a couple of reasons for why the word force is often added by some people into it. Basically, the sales force for any organization is extraordinarily vital and important to the entity. And we'll talk some about some of the evidence of that. But basically, some people feel like you need to say force. Some of us just accept that everybody already knows the sales force is quite a force that needs to be reckoned with. And that it's vitally important to the organization. So I may use sales force and sales management interchangeably as we go throughout the course. It simply doesn't take long for an entrepreneur or anyone kind of working in sales management to understand how important sales is. And it's really, this quote kind of summarizes the importance of sales management to the firm. That is, there are only 2 things that sales or that organizations do. They make things and they sell things. So in 8 letters, you can kind of summarize what the 2 most important things that a company does. And that's from Henry Mintzberg, who's one of the most prominent strategists, management strategists, in the history of time. So he's a great thinker, but this is from the book Managers, Not MBAs. But that idea of we make things and we sell things shows you just how critical selling is to a company. So what I want to talk about is I want to use some of this data, and I'm going to start getting a macro view, but most of this data is going to be pulled from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics from the May 2019 report that was on occupational employment and wages. So I'm going to pull some of this data, but if you just look at some of this different data, you can start seeing, well, where are some of the salespeople employed and just how much are companies really spending on that total. So you can see these average wages, and then you can see the number of people employed. So one of the stats that you'll often hear is that 10% of the United States labor force works in sales or sales-related jobs. So if you looked at that, and you may recall from the reading that you had, that there's close to 5 million salespeople who work in retail sales. So we're going to talk some about the difference in retail sales and business-to-business sales as we move along. But some of the data that I want to point out here is there's about 14 million salespeople, maybe 15 million salespeople with an average salary of about $43,000 in the United States, right? So that's the actual numbers from this report in May of 2019. The top 5 industries by employment spend over $151 billion in sales. So if you took these columns and you added those up, that's about $151 billion worth of compensation that's invested just by the top 5 industries. So that's not everyone. You could take that 14 million, of course, and multiply that by that average of 43,000, and that would give you kind of a gross expenditure on just sales force compensation. So this is compensation. This is just the labor cost. This is not the cost of equipping them or training them or any of those types of things. This is just direct compensation to sales force or to people who work in sales roles. Okay, so that's salespeople. So let's turn and look now at sales managers. If we look at the compensation for sales managers, it's notably higher, right? You can see from these industries these are the top employing industries in terms of number of people employed in the United States for sales managers. And so the people who some of these like management of companies and enterprises, so that's someone who's managing a company or an enterprise who sees their role as predominantly being sales, right? So those are some of the highest wages that you're going to get. But there are also some other ones in these bigger industries like computer sales, computer system design sales. Some of these actually have pretty high salaries. And I'll talk some about salaries and how they may vary somewhat across industries. But if you just kind of take those top five, these are the top five employment industries for sales managers. You can start seeing that sales managers, they're in total, before you even look at that, the total of sales managers is 402,000 sales managers. So there's about close to 400,000 sales managers in the United States. And their average salary is about $141,000 a year. So those sales managers in the top five industries spend over $16 billion. So this data that I started with on the front end would add up to about $16 billion for those top five industries that spent, again, just on sales management compensation. An interesting comparison of sales management income is to think about, okay, well, what do marketing managers make? So you can kind of compare this average salary for sales managers to that of marketing managers. So when you look at marketing managers, like sales managers, it's going to vary again by industry, right? So these are some of the different industries. These are the top five employers or marketing managers in the United States. So this is basically kind of the wages that they make, the average wage they make in those different industries. And if you multiply those numbers out, then that's going to give you some aggregate number for what the top five spend. Before we get into kind of what the top five industries spend, at the largest level, marketing managers, total number of marketing managers is about 263,000. So fewer marketing managers than sales managers positions. By about 140,000 or so, roughly 140,000 difference there. Their average salary is 149,000, so that's slightly more than what sales managers make. And the top five are the spending. So in terms of aggregate spending for the top five, that's about $14 billion. So in terms of investment, you start to see, even if you look at the top five industries, there's more money that's being spent on the sales managers because of the quantity of sales managers that those top five industries need. But you can also see just career-wise, your average salaries are going to be pretty similar if you're in marketing management or if you're in sales management. And a lot may have to do with like which industry you're in or which industry you decide to pursue your career in. So that's some of the data on marketing managers. If I kind of drill down into marketing managers and say, okay, well, let's look at the top five industries for marketing managers, top five paying industries. So now this is not the top five in terms of number, but the top five in terms of which industries pay the most to marketing managers. So this is the data that gets into that. So this is the top five paying industries. So you start seeing some of these industries pay quite a bit more, but in some cases, these industries are rather small, right? So these are rather small. They don't hire that many, maybe 400, 500 or so marketing managers that are employed in those. If you're into like scientific research and development services, there are quite a few marketing managers employed in that domain, and those wages are really rather high, right? So that's close to $190,000 a year on some of these. So depending on your industry, it's going to have a lot to do with your income, and it's also going to be it's going to have a lot to do with like how much that industry invests. So when you're thinking about the reason how much an industry invests might matter to you at an early career stage is that down the road you may decide to change from company A to company B, and as you change from company A to company B, if there are more opportunities in these areas where there are more managers. Okay, so if I wanted to take some of that information and sum it up in a slide or so, some of the key takeaways that you got from this U.S. employment data. Marketing and sales managers, as I mentioned earlier, have very similar average incomes. While a salesperson is a title for many entry-level positions, there really isn't a comparable thing. So we can't really look at a sales title and say, okay, this is what a salesperson, an entry-level marketing person would make as a comparison. There aren't that many entry-level marketing positions. So with far more entry-level sales positions, we can do more to look at what salespeople make and stuff like that. So salespeople, as I mentioned, make about 10% of all jobs in the United States. In addition to that, they also make about half of the jobs for undergraduate business schools. So about half, including Ole Miss, send about half or more of their undergraduate business school graduates to sales positions. So it's a great place to kind of look at. There's a lot of variety in the types of sales jobs. We're going to talk some about some of the different variety that's there. One of the first differences that I want to point out is going to be the difference between B2B and B2C. So business to consumer sales, that's basically retail sales. Retail is business to consumer. That's basically what retail means. So that's business to consumer. Some of those jobs actually do pay quite well and are really good jobs, like financial services, real estate brokers. Some of those may pay extremely well. If you look at some of the data that's there, and they account for about 5 million of the 15 million sales jobs in the United States. So that's about a third of them. So you got 10 million more jobs in other areas. One of those other major areas is going to be in business to business sales. So business to business sales, which I'm going to talk some about, I'm going to show you some of the pay for salespeople in those different areas. So we're going to drill down into the sales pay so you can look by industry and see some more details about sales jobs. But some of these sales jobs may be in supply chain related things. So this is if you know, the supply chain is quite extensive. So people who make parts that they sell to someone else to incorporate into their product. So if I make parts for an automobile like Michelin tires and I sell those Michelin tires to a Ford Motor Company, then that's basically a business to business transaction. Sales consulting jobs, if you're in consulting or something like that, then that's going to basically be selling your services to a business. That's a business to business outcome. Medical or pharmaceutical sales, if you're selling medical devices, as many undergraduate students express an interest in doing, medical devices to a hospital is a business to business. A hospital is like a business. It operates like a business. So that's a different kind of a sales and a different kind of a role that you would be engaged in all of those business to business positions. So that's some of the takeaways from the data to this point. So I want to look a little deeper into the top 5 industries for salespeople. So if we look at the top 5 industries for salespeople, the top 5 employing industries for salespeople here are top 5 paying. Again, not top 5 in number, but the top 5 paying are going to be basically in financial services. This is kind of what this is, right? So if you're selling financial products, investment products, brokerage kind of work, there are a lot of people who work in that, and that's one of the highest paying areas. So those are challenging jobs to secure, right? You can see that because of the income and stuff that's associated with it. You can get an idea of kind of some of the expenditures that these top 5 do. But you also start seeing some variation. When you look at this, there are only like 130 people in this particular industry, pipeline, transportation, and crude oil, although it pays high. 10,000 in scientific research and development. So I mentioned that industry, for example, earlier. But this, again, is just kind of what surfaces when you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics to try to figure out, okay, are there some higher paying jobs or some industries that might employ a number of salespeople that would be attractive for me as a career. So when you're doing things like thinking about where do you want to go to work, drilling into some of this Bureau of Labor Statistics stuff, this is Google. You can use Google and get access to this occupational employment and wages data. That's a great place to start to think about, well, what industries would I want to target, and how can I go after targeting those, and how do those look short term, which is what this data is looking at in terms of sales jobs. This is more short term. I think most people would be happy with 6 figures coming out of college. I know I would have jumped at it back when I was coming out of college. The Army, I can assure you, paid much, much less. Every now and then a pay table from that era comes up. And it's pretty dismal in comparison to these numbers. So there are some great starting jobs in sales and some great opportunities to get into companies and then move from those sales jobs into sales management jobs. So you want to kind of think about what types of jobs are out there. Let's look deeper into the sales management pay in terms of industries and stuff like that. Okay, so I highlighted some of these because you're starting to see a significant number of people or a decent number of people in some of these areas and very high paying jobs. So this is over $200,000 in security. So if you go into brokerage and then you become managing a group of brokers and stuff like that in financial services, that pays a lot of money. So that's why you have a lot of competition for those kind of jobs. If you go into things like scientific research and development, again, a lot of money again on the management side, right? So these are 180 to 200. Again, this is basically just your compensation. So it's not uncommon at all in jobs that you start as a salesperson or that you start as a sales manager to get a pretty significant amount of money that goes into retirement or goes into stock options or goes into compensation that's not covered here, goes into benefits that you get. All that's kind of above and beyond these base numbers. So this is just basically looking at gross salary, mean wages, and those to give you a feel for some of the expenditure just on those wages. So there are a lot of benefits for sales careers. When you think about sales careers, some of the benefits that people think about most are some of the numbers that I just went through, compensation potential. So I've showed you some of those numbers, and I hope you find some of those motivating. It's very challenging work, and you get great feedback. So sales managers do work that's very visible. So it's really easy to kind of produce results and to see those results. And because of that, it's really easy for companies to justify hiring salespeople. So when you hear things like calculations of return on investment, sales has got the easiest calculation for return on investment of any function that's out there, pretty much. And that actually helps managers and people who work in business to understand the real true value of sales. The reading that you had talked about a saying that sales eats first, leaders eat last. That's kind of a common thing that happens in the military. You always eat last as a leader. So if you take the flip side, who's actually doing the work? The reason you're eating last is because the people who are really doing the work are the people who need the fuel to continue on more. So that's the idea of sales eats first. It's very flexible in terms of work activities. You do a lot in terms of deciding how you're going to spend your time, where you want to spend your time, where you want to put your energy, what kind of things you want to put your energy into. And we'll talk some about sales managers thinking about what are the best activities for salespeople to do, because that's kind of what we're talking about. And then you learn the business from the bottom up, from where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. That's really kind of what drew me into sales. When I was coming out of the Army and was interviewing with different companies, a recruiter very good recruiting firm told me that sales is basically the combat arms of corporate America. So as an infantry guy, combat arms I knew that's where I wanted to be. That's out there on the front line. That's where you make things happen. That's where businesses can be successful, right? So that was my leaning from the beginning, and it's also a very proven path to climb the corporate ladder. If you want to be a CEO or general manager level type of person, you want to be a marketing and sales manager, it's a very common path to start as a salesperson, go to a sales manager, go to marketing and sales management. So you might do a role that's in there. So the line between marketing and sales blurs in some of the larger companies. So a company like Procter & Gamble, it's very well integrated. And the way I'm going to talk about sales strategy and marketing strategy is that you need to integrate those two. So a lot of what you've learned about marketing is going to be very, very, very useful to what you do in sales and to your career down the road if you decide you want to be the marketing and sales manager, which is typically that's a very typical spot to go from there to like CEO of the company. So here's some anecdotal information on some of the people who have done that. If you take like Mark Cuban, everybody knows Mark Cuban, who started this. This is basically kind of a list of some of the people who started in sales, some of the giants of business who started in sales and made their way. He's the first person that's kind of on this list. If you don't know Mark Cuban's the owner of the Dallas Mavericks. He's on the Shark Tank. So in fact, a couple of other people that are on this list also are sharks on Shark Tank. And you can kind of see what his net worth is from this sign. Howard Schultz, who started Starbucks, the chairman and the CEO of Starbucks. Basically, his first job was with a sales rep at Xerox. So he also sold some kitchen appliances. So that's where Schultz's background is. John Paul DeGiorio, who's basically from John Paul Mitchell Systems, basically started selling hair care products door to door. So that's basically where he got his start. That's more of a B2C position. If you go back to Mark Cuban's first job selling garage bags door to door, that's a B2C. So you can go B2C to B2B software sales. That job was more of a B2B job. The sales rep for Xerox at Howard Schultz, when I talked about that earlier, that's more of a B2B job. I don't know enough about the kitchen appliances that he sold. That might have been B2C. But some of these skills that you get in B2C transfer over to B2B. Especially like the personal relationship things and getting accustomed to talking to people and getting used to kind of asking people to buy things from you, those kind of things. You get a lot of it. You can get really good honing of your skills in B2C that will transfer over to B2B. So Nick Woodman of GoPro started selling necklaces on California beaches. That's where he got his start off. So if you're a big fan of GoPro, that's a more contemporary product. Damon John also started by selling pencils in grade school, and then he started selling some hip hop clothing, which fits kind of with where he evolved. and then Barbara Cochran. So both Damon John and Barbara Cochran are from Shark Tank as well, as is Mark Cuban. So you got 3 Shark Tank folks who are on here. But Barbara Cochran started in real estate. So real estate you can do both ways. You can do real estate business to consumer, which is what we would be familiar with when we go house hunting and we work with a real estate agent to find a home. Or you can do real estate in business to business. So that's often called commercial real estate. So there are lots of different jobs and things. If you're doing commercial real estate, then you might be selling things like developments of like strip shopping centers, for example. Somebody has to sell in the brand into those shopping centers so that they become part of that sort of thing. So commercial real estate, or you're selling properties to other businesses who are buying those. Okay, so that's just kind of a highlight of some of the famous executives who started in sales. I want to talk some about some of the drawbacks because, I don't want to give you a one-sided argument where it's all just pros. The sales careers also have some drawbacks that are associated with them. So this slide's trying to get at that. Limited supervision. So this works for a lot of people. A lot of people don't like a lot of supervision. So this may not be as big of a drawback. Some people want more guidance and more nurturing and more supervision and those kind of things. And so this also will vary somewhat by company and organization in terms of like how much work your manager does with you. But one of the things we'll talk about in this class is coaching. So coaching is an important component, and that can kind of address some of this drawback of limited supervision that salespeople might have. Okay, there's going to be conflict because you basically have a seller and a buyer. You're representing a selling organization and you're selling to a buying organization. These businesses are very rational and economic driven. This is kind of what drives a lot of their decisions. So when you're in that situation, there's an economic reality that both sides see, and they calculate the economics of the different decisions. Even if we're not talking about just purely what's the price of this product, there are some economic elements that are going to basically be there. And that, along with like just different interests or different goals that you might have, are going to create conflict. Conflict basically being like, my seller wants me to do one thing, my buyer wants me to do another. So you have to kind of be good at kind of managing through those conflicting interests and finding like overlapping areas of interest that often work for both the buyer and the seller. So working through that conflict is one thing. Depression from lost sales is another issue. Like you're going to be rejected. So one of the hardest things for people to do is to ask for other people to do something for them. So when you're asking for somebody to part with their income or part with their funds in exchange for the products or the offerings that you have, that's a hard ask. So one of the hardest parts about selling is closing the sale. So closing the sale and asking for that or developing that is a big part of it. But sales has evolved so much that a lot of these relationships between buyers and sellers are much, much more like partnerships, much more like a general business that you're looking out for on the seller side and a general business that the buyer's looking out for on their side. So, but you do get rejections and you do have to kind of overcome that rejection. So being able to kind of have some buoyancy, as Pink would call it, as one of the 3 new ABCs of sales. He talks about attunement, buoyancy, and clarity as being 3 of the things that salespeople have to be good at. Attunement is basically thinking about things from your buyer's perspective. So that plays to this conflict issue. Buoyancy is really about this idea of how do you overcome this depression from lost sales. And clarity is really about how do you kind of position your message in a way that helps convey the message to the buyer. And that clarity is going to be really important, a really important component of how you present value propositions in the sales role. Okay, so this whole idea of rejection and discomfort from buying, and I've got that as a separate line, but that's kind of related to this depression from lost sales. That discomfort from asking for buying, happens before the depression from lost sales. So sequentially, that probably would have been a better bullet point, moved up than down. Okay, so those are some of the drawbacks of sales careers. When you're thinking about the macro view of sales and some of these economics, some of the points that I wanted to make from this set of slides is really that, okay, you got about 14 million salespeople in the United States. You got about 400,000 sales managers. If you did the math on that, that's about 34 direct reports per manager. But really, managers don't really manage 34 people. This basically comes down to the idea that some roles in sales are dual roles. Managers also sell. So in some of these dual roles, there's probably some interplay with that. But really and truly, this is only about 10 to 15 direct reports is going to be much more the norm for what a sales manager would have. So you might have 10 to 15 salespeople who are working for you if you're working in a sales management job. There's going to be major differences in the skills that are required, the nature of the work, and the wages, not only between B2C, but also B2B, and then across these different industries. And so hopefully you can, as you think about what would it be like to work in this industry or that industry, expertise and some fondness for the industry can help motivate you to those industries. But the bottom line that I hope you take away from this information on this macroeconomic view primarily of sales is that sales is a great place to start and to build your career. And what you have to realize, though, is at the same time that you know that's a great place to start and build your career, you have to realize that a lot of these starting positions are in business-to-business companies. So a lot of times you will not have heard of that business brand necessarily. You might have heard of the firm itself. But since they're not selling directly to consumers, their brands aren't always that well known. The exception of that is going to be B2B2C companies. So if you're working for a business that sells to a business that then sells to a consumer, B2B2C means like Procter & Gamble is a business, sells to Walmart is a business, and then Walmart sells to us as consumers. But Procter, in order to sell to those end consumers of Walmart, does marketing and advertising of its products. So it's going to market and advertise Charmin and Bounty and Tide. It's going to talk to the consumer about those. So you'll know those brands even if you don't know the company itself. So those are that's kind of a quick overview, macro view of the economics of sales. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to turn our attention from sales, from that macroeconomic view into like sales organizations and management roles and what managers basically do. So when we're thinking about organizations, let's kind of think. We can think from the sales text view of this as well. Like what's an overview of the three interrelated sets of management decisions or processes. So this is one of the things that you probably know that as you read through it. The text uses these words: formulation of a sales program, implementation of a sales program, evaluation and control of a sales program. So this is kind of a cascading thing that we do both in marketing and in sales. But you won't hear many organizations refer to their sales organization as a sales program. They call it an organization. So when the text is using the word program, this is really what I'm calling the sales organization, the part of the organization that's really kind of focused on sales. Formulation of a sales program, I'm going to kind of equate that in many ways to developing sales strategies. How do you develop those sales strategies? Implementation is implementing strategies. You take all these strategies, and if you summed all these strategies up, the sum of those strategies is basically what your text is referring to as a program. So if you implement those different strategies, that's the second major part that you're doing. So you're trying to develop these strategies. I'm going to use the word design some in class. So you're trying to design those strategies. You're trying to implement, make those strategies happen. And then you're going to measure these outcomes. How do we kind of measure the outcomes that are there? And a lot of times that has a lot to do with like evaluating salespeople and evaluating the outcomes that those salespeople achieved. Okay, so I want to talk about what is it that managers do? What does management really mean? Like what is the whole purpose of management? So we're kind of backing up and taking a 30,000 foot perspective of management. So the primary responsibility of top management, which is where you're working towards, and depending on the size of the organization, you may start in top management. If you're an entrepreneur, you're there. Top management is basically to determine the organization's goals, strategies, and design, right? So this is, what are the goals? What's the strategy and what's the design? Thereby adapting the organization to a changing environment. So that's really what management is really focused on, this idea of goals, strategy, and design. So a goal, to define that, a goal is basically, this is at the organizational level again, right? A goal is a desired state of affairs that the organization attempts to reach. So it's something they're trying to accomplish. A strategy then, the key thing you want to pick up here is the word plan. A strategy is a plan. A strategy is basically a plan for interacting with competitive environment to achieve organizational goals. So what's your plan? How are you going to make that plan? What is basically your plan for achieving the goals that the organization has set? And then design is really about the administration and execution of the strategic plan. So right off the bat, you should see some commonalities. This idea of implementation is kind of a separate stage from the design or the development of those strategies. And then, of course, you've got some subsequent step then that's going to be about evaluating and controlling those different outcomes. What I'm going to refer to is what's called the OGSM framework. The OGSM framework is the O stands for organization, the G for goals, the S for strategies, and the M for measures. So this is possibly started at P&G. There's some confusion about where it actually first started, with different people sort of claiming to be the starting place for this. I saw it at P&G first when I worked at P&G and saw how the OGSM was implemented by Procter & Gamble. So I think it's a phenomenal framework for basically kind of laying out what are your objectives. So you kind of see this is the objectives of the organization. This example is from like a bread company, right? An Ace bread company. The objective is to be the largest bread manufacturer in the United Kingdom and to be a supplier of choice to the top 4 supermarket chains. So that's what this bread company's objective is, Ace Bread, right? So Ace Bread, then from that objective, they have several related goals. And so they'll kind of spell out those goals. One of the things that you'll notice that a lot of companies do is they try to quantify goals. So the quantification of these goals, you can see as you move down this line, is pretty evident. The goals are very quantifiable because what's going to happen is we're going to want to have measures after we implement this strategy to see how well do we do on that goal. So these are the goals. What's the strategy? What is our plan to get from these goals to those measures? Right, to achieve these goals, and then how are we going to see how well we're doing against that? That's kind of the idea of OGSM. We have these objectives, we have goals that kind of support those objectives, and a lot of times there will be multiple goals for each objective. So think of the objective as being sort of the bigger idea, right? The goals being kind of subordinate aspects that would be representative of achieving or moving towards those objectives or achieving that objective. And then the strategies are how do you reach those goals? And then you're going to have some measure that's associated with it. That's basically the OGSM framework. It's a very malleable framework to work on a lot of different levels. You'd have these, at P&G, we would have these at different levels throughout the organization. So they would be cascading in many ways throughout the organization as you went up and down the firm. So that's a framework to think about how do I put together objectives, goals, strategies, and measures. What is a marketing strategy is a good question. So hopefully you have got an idea of what a marketing strategy is. There's a video out there that's on defining a marketing strategy that goes through the way I would define a marketing strategy, and it talks about strategy and the roots of strategy, the term strategy, how strategy kind of evolved over time. And one of the key things is to think about marketing from a customer-centric perspective as basically being a plan, right? That's to gain or sustain customer value in a chosen target market. So that chosen target market is kind of a big part of that, and that's essentially the way I would think about a marketing strategy. And hope if you haven't had a chance to see that video, then you can go back and you can read more about how I'd build that up in more detail. A sales strategy then is also going to be a plan, so you can kind of see this idea. It's a plan to use, and then what are we using in sales? We're using salespeople, sales processes, and sales technology to link a sales organization to a targeted customer to achieve sales objectives. So you can kind of see from that OGSM idea, we've got these different objectives that are out there, and we've identified some target customer. Sometimes this is we might call it a target market, so it may be multiple customers who are basically of the same genre, the same type of customers, depending on the level we are in the organization, and then that targeted customer or that target market we'll assign some different sales objectives that are associated with that. So then the strategy is basically how we're going to use people, processes, and technology to link our organization to that targeted customer. Okay, so I'm going to talk some about an overview of sales management. So as an overview of sales management, what I want to do with this slide is to help you to kind of think about things from the macro level of the organization, from organizational strategy and environmental factors. A lot of these are things that, like environmental factors, a lot of times are things as marketers or salespeople or sales managers, are things that we monitor and that we're sensitive to, but we may not be able to change or shift. But those often affect organizational strategy as well. But if we start from that very 30,000 foot level and we started drilling down, we're going to know that those things are going to affect the marketing strategy. And the marketing strategy is going to affect two big components that are going to impact your world as a sales manager. One I'm going to refer to as sales design. So Salesforce design is going to get into things like strategy. This is sort of the thinking side of the most thinking side. This is more of an analytical side of sales. This is thinking about the relationships. What are we trying to do? This is thinking about what portfolio of technologies, which particular technology tools might we have in that sense. And it's also going to think about processes. So HubSpot, if you do the HubSpot training or when you do the HubSpot training on Salesforce management, really centers on the idea of processes and the sales process and how do you develop the sales process. That's going to be of central concern on this design part. The other part that I think about when I think of sales managers and what they do is leadership. So this is the people side. This is totally about people. And when I'm talking about people, we're talking about hiring people, training people, coaching people, motivating people, compensating people, team leadership. All those kind of things are basically things that a sales leader does in order to kind of lead. So those kinds of things, team leadership is going to come into play. So it's much more going to come into like, depending on the types of accounts, we've seen much more of an evolution of teams, sales teams that are out there. So being able to lead a sales team becomes a critical component. In fact, if you're just looking for a job in leadership and you look at the number of people who are out there looking for a leader, and there's 15 million salespeople, that's more than pretty much anything else in business. That's a great place to go to practice your leadership skills, right? So there's a big component of leadership in sales management. Leadership and design are going to be the two big things that we'll talk about in the class. And those things basically drive salesperson performance. So what you're trying to do is improve the output or the outcome that salespeople can achieve. And the outcome that they achieve, then you're going to measure those outcomes and then just continuously seek improvement to try to improve the design or the leadership processes that you're implementing. So that's what I would use as kind of an overview of sales management and kind of a quick introduction for some of the things that are associated with sales management. What I want to do now is I want to turn towards helping you to understand value propositions and how value propositions can be used to integrate sales, marketing, and organizational strategy. Okay, so value propositions on the strategic side of this, we know that we're often in a market. We've chosen some target market, and we're thinking about that target market from having a marketing mix. So the marketing strategy is really these two components, and there's a lot. I've got a lot of stuff that's out there that goes through these slides, and I'll let a former student kind of go through this a little bit more. But on the right-hand side, we have these two components of basically a marketing mix represented by the 4 P's here in a target market. And then that target market, we're trying to think about as we analyze the market in a market opportunity analysis. It's these 5 things: customers, competitors, company, collaborators, context help us to kind of do some of this analysis. Because what we're trying to do ultimately is to position our product in the mind of the target market in a way that encourages them or increases the likelihood or the probability that they'll purchase our product or our offering over our competitors. So we get to that through some of these quantitative and qualitative techniques like segmenting, differentiation, targeting. Those kind of things help us to get to this idea of positioning that we're trying to use to get into the target market. So this middle part is basically trying to connect the left-hand side, which is the market opportunity analysis, with the right-hand side of the slide, which is the marketing strategy. So what I want you to see is that this, you're often tailoring things. You're basically trying to tailor. And what you're tailoring here is really kind of how you can offer the most value to your target market. So what you end up kind of producing for these target markets are these value propositions, which is really your promise to the market of what you can do, what you or your offering will do for them if they purchase the product or if they purchase your offering. Okay, so this is cyclical. So you want to know this as being cyclical. A lot of people in terms of marketing will often think you got to start with a product. You don't really have to start with a product. You can start kind of anywhere on this grid and develop your marketing strategy. But not only is it cyclical, it's dynamic. So you're often kind of going back and revisiting your marketing strategy to try to develop the best marketing strategy possible. So that's my overview of a marketing strategy and how I teach marketing strategy, and hopefully it jives with part of what you've read. I know in this course you've read from the framework of marketing strategy. This is kind of a graphic of that framework. And what I hope is that your previous studies in marketing kind of contribute to an understanding of this, because we're going to take this and build on it as we go into the sales management. But as a really quick review, what I want to do is I've got a video that's about a 5-minute video from a former student that I want to integrate in to the presentation here. So this is courtesy of a former student, Hillary Smith, who has an MS in marketing now. She's finished her graduate degree and is working in marketing. I'm proud to say, right? As are a number of former students who are out there working marketing or sales positions. But this is Hillary's take on that slide that I just showed you that outlines marketing strategy.
Hey, my name is Hillary Smith, and today I'm going to be going over Fab number 7 from the Fab 50 slides from Dr. Hunter's class. And as you can see, this is called the slide. This is the strategic marketing planning process, and probably one of the most important and fundamental things to learn and take away from the Fab 50. So I'm going to go over this below. So the marketing strategy centers on proposing value to targeted customers and should be tailored to market opportunities using customer insights afforded through qualitative and quantitative analysis. So this is really important to understand the market and how you should tailor those opportunities to your customers. So I'm going to start on the far left, and these are the 5 C's. So customers are the people, obviously, that you're interested in your target market. Competitors, so understanding who your competition is, either directly or indirectly. Your company, so it's just a little bit more about your company itself, the details and information about it. Your collaborators are basically your supply chain, so suppliers and distributors, and context. So this is going to include areas such as political, economic, social, technology, and environment. So using the PESTLE acronym. Moving more to the middle, so you have your S, T, D, and P. So segmenting is when you're going to just divide who you're going to focus on based on common characteristics. Targeting is deciding on which in those segments that you're going to focus and kind of nuance your product or service. Differentiation is basically what you have that your competitors don't. And the little arrow that kind of swings over into the 4 P's is positioning. So basically it's how you're positioned in the mind of your consumers. So moving to the far right is product, place, price, and promotion, which is the 4 P's of marketing. And in the middle, you'll see the target market. And product is obviously your product itself, your place, so it's going to be where you're selling this product or service, where the transactions are taking place. Price is obviously you're going to want to identify what that price looks like for your product or service, and promotion, so how you're getting the word out about your product. And obviously these are all centered around the target market. The 4 P's are all interchangeable, so they don't have to be done in any order. And then as you can see, there's an arrow at the bottom leading back to the 5 C's. So this process should be continuous. It should always be adapted to the market, and it's always something that you're going to want to revisit as you go through the process. So for this slide, I'm going to go over the 5 C's of Mercedes-Benz. The first one is customers. So right now they're focused on 25 to 45-year-olds and baby boomers with a more emphasis on lifestyle. Competitors, BMW, Porsche, Audi, Volkswagen, just to name a few. Their company itself, they're a German-based company founded 94 years ago. They have 93 offices worldwide. They manufacture cars in 17 countries on 5 continents, and they're distributed all over the world. As of right now, they have invented 6 impactful automotive technologies that are still in existence today. And China is their biggest market with 28% of sales, followed by the US at 14% and Germany at 14%. As for collaborators, they're working to advance their case, which is the connectivity, autonomous, shared, and services and electric strategy by working with their supplier network to make more intentional and flexible international focus and placing greater emphasis on localization. So hiring and servicing those types of technological advances within those local communities that they are distributing their product. In addition to expanding its 2,000 strong global network of suppliers, they are pursuing policy of sourcing parts wherever its vehicles are produced to minimize its vulnerability to political developments such as trade conflicts. And it ties into context. They're also shifting to eco-friendly cars, part of that environment focus, policy developments to make sure that those cars are servicing the policies in each country, and also an increase in technology for car safety and features. So this next slide is going to focus more on the S, T, D, and P. So the segment is luxury automobile market for sedans and SUVs, both at the high and low end market segments. And basically when it comes to the targeting portion, they introduced a lot of different levels of the market. So they introduced a C class for the low end of the market, E class for a mid-size luxury car, the S class for a high-end luxury vehicle, and SL for sports cars. So this kind of breaks it up into different groups, as I mentioned before. Differentiation, so they're really focused, like I mentioned, on technology. So right now they have a few different features, such as Mercedes Me, which is remote parking via your cell phone app. Digital light technology, which displays lights on the road, such as turn signals to help improve safety for other drivers and pedestrians. Positioning, so once centered on the safety, luxury, and precision engineering of their cars, now their marketing strategy has shifted to more of a lifestyle oriented and is focused more on presenting the more fun loving, approachable, and energetic side of Mercedes. So next I'm going to focus on the 4Ps. The first one is product, so it's obviously a Mercedes brand of cars and SUVs. Place, they have their own line of dealerships that you can purchase from. Price, they're a premium luxury vehicle. Depends on the car type, but there are more offerings as mentioned under the targeting section as there previously was before. Promotion, they spend a lot on advertising events such as golf, tennis, and New York Fashion Week, which I'll show you in the next slide. And then also too, as far as promotion goes, as you can see in the photo above, this is The Weeknd, and he was actually used to attract a younger audience with the campaign to promote the first electric SUV vehicle that Mercedes-Benz has come out with. So they used him to kind of attract that younger audience. Another slogan that they're coming out with is "Just Like You," which focuses on what makes the car unique. And I think this is really cool because they're actually trying to tie in people who are living in the digital era to understand their preferences, their needs, and their characteristics, which is why, again, what really differentiates them is the use of technology that they are building in their cars. And also too, like I mentioned previously in the company section of the 5Cs, Mercedes-Benz is known for having innovative and technological advances when it comes to like the automotive industry. Again, these 4Ps are interchangeable, so they don't need to occur in any order. And this process does repeat itself and will be continuously evolving over time, just like we experienced. As I mentioned on the previous slide, they're very impactful when it comes to sponsorship and events and immersive use of the brand. So the top photos all represent different sponsorship that they have with golf, the Mercedes-Benz stadium in Atlanta, Georgia, and then also a lot of tennis events. And at the bottom, they have the AMG racetrack that you can actually drive some of their high performance sports cars. And the photo in the middle is actually one of their immersive studios, so you can actually touch the product, get inside the car and kind of really see how it feels. And then on the right, they have a lot of partnerships with brands for a lot of different products. As you can see from this presentation, Mercedes is definitely a lot more than just cars. They want to immerse people in the brand digitally at events, with products and a lot of services that they provide. All of these different points touch on the slide in the strategic marketing planning process. Again, this is interchangeable and it's a consistent cycle. So Mercedes is definitely going through that rebranding process of finding out who their real true customer is, what the environment looks like, where there's opportunities for them, how they can reposition themselves in the mind of the consumer. And as you can see here, this is actually one of their first autonomous cars that they're working to build out for the future. So continuing to evolve in the technological space will be able to push them forward and give them the success that they're looking for.
Okay, so that was a great overview of marketing strategy and how it works from the application of the slide. What I want to talk about now is I want to go into like one of the central components of that concept is the idea that you can create value by tailoring your offering to fit each chosen customer market. So you basically, in terms of marketing strategies, you're going to have a marketing strategy for every target market. So you've got the target market. This is basically a market of people you're trying to market to. You've got the marketing mix. That's basically anything and everything that you can change about your product. So that's often represented by the 4Ps to help us with a mnemonic to kind of get there in terms of like what is everything we might change about the offering. But the idea of what you're doing with your marketing mix is that you're tailoring your mix to the target market in a way that basically creates value. So you're trying to create value, customer value, by that alteration of the mix. So that basically there's something you change about your product that they like more than they like versus its competitor. It adds more in terms of value is basically going to be the difference between benefits and costs. So it adds more benefits to that customer than it costs. So the idea of creating customer value is you're trying to kind of optimize that ratio of benefits to cost for your target market mix by changing or altering some component of the offering. And so it may be something about the product itself, it may be about the price, the product, the place. Those are 4 different areas, major areas that you want to think about very broadly in terms of things that you could change to make your offering more attractive to a target market. So in sales, we're thinking about that. We're thinking about target markets as well. While we have two components here from the marketing mix, sometimes what we're doing, as I took the example earlier when I was talking about B to B to C sales, you're often like what you're actually doing in some of these consultative sales roles is you're thinking about solutions for the business customer, who in this case would be a retailer. You're thinking about solutions for them that are really essentially marketing solutions. What's the best way for them to market the products through their retail stores? And what you're often trying to do is figure out how do your products and your competitive products give that retail store, for example, the best laundry detergent category they can possibly have. How do they maximize the space that they've got for laundry? And if you know retail stores or grocery stores or supermarkets, you know that space is extremely limited. So it's very hard to kind of sell in new things to get new space in a store because they only have a limited amount of space for the products that they have, and the stores are kind of covered shelf to shelf. Every inch of that grocery store shelf, for the most part, is accounted for. Okay, so that's part of what you're doing in terms of marketing strategy. So when you think about marketing strategy, one view is like, okay, if we have this target market, and you're saying these are these different target markets that are out there, when do we employ a salesperson, right? When do we kind of think about employing a salesperson? So a lot of marketers will think about this matrix. This is basically what's called the communications matrix or the promotions mix. So the promotion mix is a common way for marketers to think about it. And in the promotion mix, there's basically 4 types of ways you can communicate to your market. And we're going to talk about those ways. The way we're going to make these 4 cases are going to be impersonal ways of communicating and personal ways of communicating. And then we're going to overlay that with paid. Are we paying for this communication or is it unpaid? And that's going to give us basically the 4 major ways that marketers can communicate with their markets. And the top one, if you're thinking about, well, what's an unpaid way that's impersonal, that's public relations. So public relations isn't something they're paying for directly, but it is something that is going to affect or have communications about their brand. So word of mouth is really the second one. That is personal and unpaid. So marketers, word of mouth has become much more powerful in the internet age and the social media age. So there's a lot of concern and monitoring and efforts to kind of impact that. And word of mouth is really important because consumers in particular are very much influenced by what other consumers recommend. So these recommendations and stuff like that. In the world of social psychology, that's called social proof. It's basically some validation that from others that basically this would be a good product. So word of mouth is an important communication tool. So advertising and sales promotion. So this is advertising that so this is television advertising, Super Bowl advertising on the top. A sales promotion is a way of communicating. A sales promotion isn't like money to the sales force, so you want to know that. A sales promotion is basically a coupon. Like this is something that's a short-term incentive that a marketer is applying to the market. So when you think of sales promotion, you think about dropping coupons like Domino's pizza coupons or something like that. That's basically a sales promotion. And then the 4th way is personal selling. So personal selling is basically this thing the marketer is paying for, and it's a personal way to communicate with customers. So you can see how some of these customers may be retail customers, in other words, consumers. So salespeople are using consumer settings, and salespeople may be communicating to businesses. Okay, so personal selling then is just, if we're going to define that, this is a traditional definition. It's basically, paid personnel, basically, who are communicating on the organization's behalf as a source of the message. So that's a traditional definition for professional selling. Whenever there's like 2-way communications with a customer strengthens the selling organization's capacity to achieve its strategic objective, that's basically the response of when should a company employ a salesperson. So if it strengthens it, that can be a fairly low bar. From the way I've just framed this, it can strengthen it if there's some way that, a personal communication helps in terms of the promotion mix. So the cost, it's more expensive to get a message out through a salesperson than it is to get it out through advertising in terms of a per contact basis. So it's the most expensive way to get your message out. But sometimes it may be the only way or the most effective way, and marketers may think about the salesperson as the messenger. But what I'm going to argue is that's a pretty constrained way to think about selling. If you're just thinking about all you do is convey the message from marketing, that sounds pretty constrained, for people who are kind of innovative and independent and autonomous like salespeople are. But that's really kind of the traditional promotion mix way of thinking about sales. So firms often who use salespeople in this way will often talk about how do we get the salesperson to stay on message. Let's do more training to make sure they stay on message and say, the marketing message and hit the message, hit the message, hit the message, hit the message. So, if you're the marketing person and the salespeople are implementing it, maybe that's a fun job. But if you're the person who's just repeating things, just repeating the message, does that sound like a fun job? I mean, to me, I'm not so sure that that's a fun job. So, more to the point of this class, is it an effective use of a salesperson? So that's where you want to be critical in thinking about it. Is that an effective way to use a salesperson? It may be in some cases, right? But there are going to be limited conditions where that's going to be the most effective way to get your message out. And you want to think about, when you think about, is that the most effective way to get the message out? Do they need a college degree? If all we want them to do is to say what marketing is saying, they may not need a college degree. And even more, you may not even need a person. In the contemporary selling, web bots, chat bots, they basically can kind of sell. We know from science that different voices or different accents are preferred by different buyers. So if you have a bot that's doing your message, you can give them the most optimal voice. You can use artificial intelligence. I mean, we have Siri and Alexa who are talking to us and can, have all sorts of access to information and can find out different things that, an individual person can't find out. So there are some tasks where when the buyer's questions are very simple, rudimentary, and mechanistic, those mechanistic kind of tasks may be more prone to these kind of just say the message kind of thing. There are other tasks that are more complex. So when the task gets more complex, then we have to think about, well, is this the right role for the salesperson? Do we want a salesperson out there with a megaphone just blasting the message at the customer? So what I'm going to argue is that since a lot of that is very much code to proning and mechanistic, it's very prone to being substituted by automation, very prone to being done by others. So I don't think that's the kind of sales career that you want to focus your efforts primarily on. Maybe you start in a role that's got more of that, but you want to move out of that at some point because technology is displacing a lot of the people who are doing those kind of roles. So thinking about sales and sales strategy means you need to think about sales a little differently from just the traditional promotion mix view. So the good news is that sales has evolved. There's been quite an evolution in selling. The era in which a salesperson was a messenger was way over here in the production era, right? So you remember this from marketing when you went through some of these different things. That's the era that was there, and I'm going to do a slide on the next thing that kind of timelines some of this. But we're all the way over in this era, the partnering era, where salespeople are they're basically working on sales teams. They're value creators. So this idea of a value creator, that's not just communicating the marketing message. That's basically kind of co-creating value with your buyers. You're working with your buyers to figure out what is it that's of value to them that is also of value to your organization. So co-creating value, managing conflict, organizing and leading sales teams, building and maintaining customer relationships. All these things are more the types of things that salespeople have been doing. And I'm not talking about just today. This was 1999. So it's been for quite a few years that the partnering era has existed, and salespeople have been doing things more along the lines of the right-hand side than along the lines of the other side. If you wanted graphical representation of how sales has evolved, it started with peddlers going door to door, and this was the 1800s, Industrial Revolution. Some guys out there, often when I see this picture, I think of somebody selling snake oil. I don't think that's actually what they're selling. But the idea of a snake oil salesman is really what fits the peddler era. Businesses then started organizing and employing salespeople in the post-industrial revolution era, or kind of going into the late 1800s. That's when businesses first started employing actual salespeople. But if you read the Pink Book actually will talk about the end of that era and how that era has already passed. So this is kind of the idea of how that era is gone. That was pre-World War II and the Depression, and there was some selling and stuff that was going on through all of that, of course. But we moved through that, and that basically was the era where the salesperson was primarily a messenger. So the salesperson would go out and they would go door to door and they would sell different things, and that's really kind of what this picture is of a door-to-door salesperson. So the selling function became much more structured and much more organized. The economics that I showed you earlier became much more prominent to businesses. They started understanding how important the sales function was. They started seeing these returns on the investment they got from structuring and organizing and putting dollars into sales. So that over time, we moved into a much more professional salesperson, a much more professional role, and a very different structure for how people think about salespeople. So if you thought about like kind of the modern salesperson, this is a slide that I took off the internet. That's a 21st century slide for like what is the anatomy of the modern sales pro. So you can kind of see what are some of the things they're thought leaders. So this idea of salesperson, you'll see knowledge megaphone. They're very thoughtful, very analytical, very much knowledge based. So there's a lot of stuff that's there. They know what they're focused on. So this is the idea of strategies and goals and how they achieve those different types of things. They're good listeners. Like this part on the upper right is really important to notice because a lot of times salespeople think it's my job to talk and I just need to talk the whole time. But being an empathetic listener is critical because what you have to do is understand your buyers and your customers and what they're trying to achieve so you can, by understanding that, better create value or co-create value with them that meets the needs that they're going after. They're passionate problem solvers. Some of these are really kind of very well trained and steeped in problem solving. So you'll have a lot of people from different areas who go into sales. So sometimes products become very technical, and as those products get very technical, then the nature of the salesperson, the training that salesperson needs may be much more technical. So you'll have, for example, engineers who go into sales roles. Those kind of things when you're selling products that are very much kind of engineered type products. So you have some differences in terms of like who fits a particular role. And again, this is going to vary by industry. A lot of technology, because in terms of like the mobile office that everybody's become very familiar with during the pandemic, this started in sales and it's been, really kind of refined to the nth degree by salespeople and sales managers. And they also kind of, as I've said earlier, they have one foot in sales and one foot in marketing. So part of their world is a marketing world and part of their world is a sales world. But that's kind of part of why I'm talking about this from a much more integrated perspective of sales and marketing. So you can see that your training and your education in marketing is highly relevant to your work, your prospective work in sales jobs. Okay, so I want to turn now to my attention a little bit more towards the 4 components of a sales strategy. And this is really kind of the last block of this video. But on this, I want to talk some about, what is it? How would you kind of break sales strategy down into some of the major components that it has? So what I've led up to at this point is the idea that you need to kind of rethink sales and not think about them as just pushing products, but you want to think about them as creating value. And that's often the idea of kind of developing the business customer's business. How do I develop the business customer's business? That's going to be the way of thinking about the way we're going to talk mostly about sales and sales roles. And that's more of a B2B conceptualization because the B2C stuff is a special case of the task and the requirements that are associated with business to business. So business to business is probably where most of the jobs are going to be and where you're going to add the most value and where they can afford to pay the salary that you're going to want. This often happens, this value creation thing often happens across multiple touch points in the organization. So instead of it just being one salesperson, one buyer, and that's kind of all that comes about, and you see that a lot in terms of like here's one seller, one buyer, and we do all sorts of role plays, one seller, one buyer. It's more like one buying organization, one selling organization, and the salesperson is part of that team. Oftentimes the salesperson is leading teams, right? So that's part of what I was showing on that earlier slide. The salesperson becomes like the team leader, but the team doesn't have just salespeople on it. The team will have expertise from other business functional areas like like quality and R&D, logistics, marketing, accounting. That kind of expertise may be on the sales team, and they have all these different bonds with the customer side. So instead of it just being the purchasing manager, there's bonds with finance and accounting and production and engineering and R&D and those kind of things. So thinking about it as a much more complex business to business and see how it gets more into general management and the partnership between these two businesses is the way I want you to try to think some about the sales role. And the goal is, you're focused again here on how do we grow the business and personal relationship. And so it's got a real relationship component to it, to what you're trying to do to help a customer perform better with your products and solutions, right? So that's basically the idea of what I'm thinking in terms of like how would you think about sales if you're not thinking about them as purely just promoting or peddling products, right? So an alternative consideration to do is to think about not only as part of the promotion mix, but you could think about them as part of the firm's offering. So that kind of broadens it at least beyond just that one P of promotion to the P of product. So from that, and the way you get there is basically a product is the need satisfying offering of the firm. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to say, okay, a firm, then if they're part of the product, you can differentiate them. You basically can differentiate your organization with the sales force. So if that you can differentiate your offering by the salespeople or the sales force or the sales team that you have working with that customer account, if that can become a point of differentiation, that can become a means for achieving competitive advantage. So competitive advantage basically means that you've got this advantage over your competitors that's going to help you to work better with that particular customer than your competitors can. So this is broadening it slightly, but I'm going to basically suggest that you broaden it even further and think about salespeople as value creators. If you think about them as value creators, then they're often looking at basically the different customers and how they can provide like consultative services to that customer. So those consultative services can help to differentiate, again, the company and make it better in terms of its competitive positioning. It's it's also an effective means for a company to achieve growth. That's a typical goal for companies: grow, succeed in the markets they're trying to succeed, whatever objectives they've got to accomplish some of those objectives. And it's even sales organizations can even be the source of viability, meaning the survival of the firm. So a lot of companies have really struggled. So strong sales skills may help them, for example, navigate the ongoing pandemic. So these kind of skills, sales can be very important to the company. So if you think about salespeople from the perspective of the target market, what you're trying to do is you're trying to use salespeople when they can help you achieve the desired outcomes or the objectives that you have with a chosen target market. So that target market, I've taken the same symbol but changed it from target market to the word business customer, because the more you start thinking about the target market as a business customer, the more you'll start seeing the value that sales might have. So we still have that same market mix, and we're still trying to create customer value that's there. So the question of when should you hire a salesperson becomes, when could a salesperson create value for a chosen business customer? So those are the cases. Instead of like just saying, when can they just convey the message? When can they actually, through two-way communication and co-creating solutions, can they create value for a chosen target market, right, or a business customer? Okay, so that brings me to this slide, which is kind of one of the main slides, and we're winding down towards this, but this gives you an idea of how to think about sales strategy. So when you're thinking about that ring of what are the major things that salespeople do around the target market, the things that you can change or alter are things like process. What's the sales process? Your sales process is going to be a critical component for your success in selling to that target market. The people, human capital has become a really key concept in business management, but salespeople are like some of the heaviest investments that firms make in human capital. It is for their sales team, their salespeople, those compensations, those salaries that I showed you earlier, those dollar amounts that firms are spending. That's all evidence of the importance of human capital and the people themselves. And with those people, there's recruiting, hiring, training, coaching, motivating, compensating, all those that are associated with kind of implementing the sales process. The relationship. So this is the relationship. This is both the business relationship that you're trying to create with that target customer, right? How do you kind of what are your goals? What are your interests? How do you find some of these overlapping interests that are a lot of times they're going to be driven in business to business market. They're going to be driven more by business goals, the business goals of the buyer and the business goals of the seller. But there could be some overlap that are associated with like personal interests. What are the personal goals that the buyer has? What are the personal goals that the salesperson has? What are the personal interests that they have? How do those kind of overlay? So building strong relationships, strong, effective working relationships with your buyers becomes really important. And then the fourth thing that I'm going to talk about is tools, and the technology tools. So this may be a little bit of a military holdover, but when I think of technology and I think of strategy, I think of technology as being the equivalent of weaponry in war, right? So what kind of tools a salesperson has or what kind of technology tools they have is going to make a big difference on whether or not they can be effective in the marketplace. So a lot of these tools help salespeople to perform to execute the sales process. So people, process, technology, and relationships are going to be the four major components of a sales strategy that you want to think about when you're trying to design it. So if I put that all together and just make that a nice, clear golden ring, one of the things we're thinking about is how do we integrate it with marketing strategy, which is what I've been building towards. Let's take this golden ring and integrate it into our marketing strategy framework, and it basically would go there. So in terms of the marketing strategy framework, it's basically the Salesforce strategy is the golden ring that becomes around the target. And what we're trying to do is integrate all of these different components from the organizational objectives into the marketing objectives, into the Salesforce objectives, so that we can deliver the most effective value propositions, the most value to our customer or target market accounts. And again, those are oftentimes businesses. And so the salesperson is often going to be the person who's tailoring the marketing mix, tailoring the offering, doing what they need to do to make the offering fit best with that customer. And in doing that, they're going to do a lot of the same things that you did for marketing. So they're going to think about things like, who are their customers? What are their customers' needs? Who are their competitors? Who else is out there selling something that they may be competing with? What's the company's goals? What is it that your customer is trying to achieve? What is it that your sales organization is trying to achieve? Are there like opportunities for you to collaborate with different organizations or different people? Sometimes collaborators for a salesperson are going to be internal. So there's a lot of talk and a lot of activity on the notion of salespeople having to sell internally, basically to get collaborators or people from within their firm to work to support and help with their particular account. And then contacts are going to be a lot of the same sorts of things that we talked about from marketing that are going to have some different effect on some of these different outcomes. So this is an integrated strategic marketing and sales planning process. Hopefully you've got at least a start on thinking about how salespeople can go about co-creating value to these targeted customers, again, who are often business buyers, and tailor solutions using insights. So this is where sales analytics would come into play, and the technology tools that I talked about to develop these different solutions that are beneficial to both the buying and the selling organization. Okay, so that's all that I had today on the overview or the introduction to sales management and sales strategy and organizational objectives, and why a career in sales makes a lot of sense and what some of those careers may look like. So I wanted to thank you for taking the time to go through the presentation, and I hope this was helpful to you in strengthening your insights about sales strategy and sales management.